Lawyers. What is the biggest, well, you didn't tell me that, moment you've had in your career? When defense counsel asked my personal injury client, a tall, 50-ish, leather vest-wearing biker, to describe the worst part of the neck injury he suffered when his motorcycle was hit by a car, he calmly replied, "The worst part? That I couldn't give oral intimacy. You know, the good stuff. As well as I used to." After a long pause, defense counsel asked him to repeat the answer. My client did. He wasn't faking. He seemed genuinely sad. It was the first time I'd heard about that from him. It was heartfelt, unusual, and interesting on a number of levels. Well, we all have our priorities. Next story. I represented a client who was suing for jaw and mouth-related injuries. I retained her regular dentist to testify as her expert witness. 2 days before our impending trial, my client casually mentions that she will be arriving at the courthouse with her dentist because they had become romantically involved and lived together for a year. She had more than a year at her disposal to tell me this little bit of wonderful news. And so I immediately became more agreeable to a last-minute pre-trial settlement. Next story. I worked for insert major airline and found out through a mind-numbing contract review that they were double-dipping. They'd entered into an exclusivity agreement with one insert major airline repair provider, and without telling me that had asked me to engage in a separate exclusivity agreement with another provider so they could get a second $25 million rebate. They intentionally had 2 separate attorneys, each transaction, so we wouldn't know about the double-dipping. I don't know if $25 million sounds like a lot to you, but when you are talking about airplanes, which cost buku bucks, I am not going to get disbarred so you can make a little extra money. Quit on the spot. Next story. Obligatory, not a lawyer, but I watched this unfold as a foreperson of a jury. Defendant decided to be his own lawyer, accused of pulling over and switching drivers in a car while being pursued by police for driving without a license while on probation for DUI. Officer pursuing was the same officer who arrested him for the original DUI. Plain Perry Mason. Defendant put his buddy on the stand and asked point blank, "Who was driving the car that day?" Buddy replied, "You mean before or after we switched drivers?" It was all we could do to keep a straight face. Next story. I had a client who claimed she was discriminated against by her employer due to disabilities sustained after a car crash. She said her disabilities were so bad she couldn't drive or sit at her desk for any amount of time, and her company refused to accommodate her by letting her work remotely. Needless to say, it was embarrassing when opposing counsel told me my client played in a full-contact lingerie football league and had telecast videos of her on YouTube playing, running, getting tackled, dancing in the end zone on the very date her doctor, who lost his license, gave her a note saying she was bedbound. I showed her the footage, and she continued to lie, despite having an effing stat sheet for receiving yards when she was supposedly in the hospital. Never been angrier at a client. I mean, to be fair, okay? Like when ball calls, ball calls. Sometimes you just gotta pull a Perk Rogers and get out there. Next story. A bit of a legend, but I got to read the actual trial record when a guy who claimed total loss of his use of his right arm testified for 45 minutes he had hurt his left arm. He even lifted his allegedly horrifically injured right arm above his head to demonstrate which appendage was effed. One of his attorneys just packed up his crap and walked out. Next story. Kinda the opposite of what you meant, but what's a good lawyer story if it doesn't follow the letter of the law while breaking the spirit of the law? My grandfather was a lawyer for a big oil company. They ordered a whole bunch of steel pipe for a new pipeline, and when the construction workers tried to work on it, they found it was somehow magnetized. The pipe was so magnetic their blowtorch flames didn't go straight, so they were having a really hard time welding the pipe sections together. My grandfather tried to sue the pipe manufacturer, but they just said that nothing in the original contract specified the pipe couldn't be magnetic, so the lawsuit fell through, and from then on they had to specify in every contract that the metal must not be magnetic. Next story. Friend and classmate of mine was parked downtown, which is not a great neighborhood. Someone comes up to her window to carjack her. She slowly rolls down her window and in her most disappointed voice is like, "Come on, X, I just got you out on bail." X then proceeds to apologize and walks away. Next story. The most common is that they don't have prior arrests or convictions. That usually ends when you hand them an inch-thick catalog of their activities since their 18th birthday. The post-violation phone calls are fun. Someone will violate their bond or a protective order before trial. They will get caught. They will then call and attempt to explain that everyone was lying. One guy showed up for a status on probation date, something that only happens when people who have a habit of getting violated, and he reeked of drugs. I informed him he was going to be dropping that morning. He stated that he would drop clean. I said, F it. Probation took him down. He was back and in cuffs in 15 minutes. He had tried to poke a hole in a condom filled with clean urine to beat the drop. The probation officer was looking in a mirror at this guy's meat as he pulled the urine condom out of his boxers and tried to create a stream with a needle. His pants were covered in someone else's pee because that's how stabbing condoms works. Next story. Had a client tell me that they had just signed a bunch of claim releases that ultimately tanked their case, after I explicitly told them to let me look at all documents prior to signing since I had seen something similar that they had signed almost a year back. They had signed one of these while we were gathering documents and about to take a deposition, and when I saw my client's signature on it, I just facepalmed because his signature ended up waiving away any rights they had payment. Next story. A client in a hearing for domestic violence forgot to tell me that maybe, just maybe, she had buried a knife in her husband's hand and that she had also forgotten that she used to threaten him in front of her neighbors, her family, her colleagues, and their pets. It was a cool and crooked audience trying to defend the shamefully indefensible. I like the inclusion of the pets there at the end, only because it implies, at least in my head, that they had to call the dog to the stand. Mr. Airbud, is your mama a bad lady? Next story. I was representing a guy. The senior partner had told me to handle the case. Client told me an old lady he had befriended had lent him some money. Concerned about an upcoming surgery, she had told him that if anything happened to her, in other words, if she passed away, he must consider the money a gift. Her signature was on a document to this effect, dated about a week before the surgery. Her estate was suing to get the money back. He said, "Nuh-uh, it was a gift." I subpoenaed her medical records, but they were only given to me on the day of the trial. It turned out that the old lady had fallen, been rushed to hospital, had emergency surgery, and passed away thereafter. Edit, just to add, there was only one surgery. I subpoenaed the hospital records from the hospital. The plaintiff, the estate, didn't have them at any stage prior to that, so they were not discoverable. Our client's defense was that the money was a loan-turned gift, but the plaintiff didn't know the background information that the client had given to me about the old lady's worries. We knew the date and the type of surgery. The only thing we didn't know was that it was an emergency. My client's lie was the only cause of the surprise. Next story. I was the victim in a court case. Due to a traffic accident, I was on my motorcycle and had a verbal with a car driver who flicked a cigarette butt out his window and went down my jacket. He then attempted to run me over with his car. There were 3 witnesses, including an expert of acceleration. The guy claimed he was doing 60 kilometers an hour, and I braked suddenly in front of him. What happened was I was going increasingly faster to get away from him, and he rammed me when I was doing 100 kilometers per hour around a corner, which the witnesses backed up. As soon as his lawyer heard that there was 4 people saying what happened, he was speechless and asked to speak to his client, who then pled guilty. He had crashed his car head-on into a car coming the other way. I managed to stay upright and made it through the corner. No damage to my bike whatsoever. Edit, to clear things up, it was in Australia. I also have no idea what an expert in acceleration is, but when I gave my story to the cops, I told them the speeds I was doing. The guy told them the exact same speeds, so he clearly knew something about it. I have no idea why his lawyer didn't know about what we had said, but we didn't even get to enter the courtroom. It was over so fast. And just know what the police prosecutor told us. Next story. Client intake working pro bono in a fair housing clinic. I have a really solid case based on what Miss Smith has told us. Her landlord, John, was calling her a good-for-nothing, bad word, worthless piece of blash, etc. I think we have a really good case to ensure this woman won't have to pay her current landlord, or any landlord, or any rent for a long time. I ask the question that always has a bad answer. How long has it been since you paid rent? It had been a few months, but I can work with that. 25 minutes of listening, a lot of venting is going on, and documenting the case later. I start getting all of the final information. I ask for the landlord's address. Miss Smith lets me know it is the same address. I'm surprised. I ask if it's a duplex. Miss Smith says no. I ask for the landlord's full name, John Smith. The rest of the conversation went something like this. Me, Miss Smith, is John Smith in any way related to you? Miss Smith, yeah, he's my dad. Next story. Standing outside of the courtroom, first on the docket, matter is for a divorce order, after having to get substituted service because the other party was hiding out in another country. Client says to me, "Oh, I think I am already divorced in blank country. I got some papers a month ago." Matter is called 30 seconds later. I explain to the judge that I have been told this at the door. Judge gives me a look that is half piteous, half, "Are you effing kidding me?" Then reschedules the matter with instructions to confirm whether the client was divorced elsewhere. Turns out that they were. Client proceeded to leave a bad review because we couldn't get her a divorce order, despite the fact she was already divorced. Next story. Not a lawyer, but my ex-wife was one of these people. I was divorcing her under one of the few no-fault conditions my state allows. In our case, for fraud. My case was solid, and it was going to result in a quick annulment. It's rare to happen these days, apparently, because this was such a sure thing when it started the divorce stuff. I told her she was being summoned for an annulment due to fraud. I told her this because I needed to make sure she understood this wasn't going to be a typical divorce and it was going to result in zero spousal support for her. Well, she did the smart thing and got a lawyer for herself. Apparently, she told her lawyer I was filing for fraud on my own, without a lawyer, and that gave her lawyer the impression I was misusing the fraud divorce opportunity and had no case. What she didn't tell her lawyer was that I did have a lawyer, and she never told her about the fraud she committed in the marriage. Without spilling details, the fraud was super documented and substantial. Well, summons were served, her lawyer found out and dropped her in a heartbeat. The trial was quick, I won my case, and she got nothing. She didn't have legal representation at all after that first lawyer. Guys, do not lie to your lawyer. Next story. Trial for misdemeanor criminal threats. This can be hard to prove, and my client was adamant he did nothing. I had phone records, some good video. It was a simple business relationship that soured, and the alleged victim was terrible. Aggressive, liar, stealing from charity she had been involved with, sort of a public figure. My client was alleged to have made a threat to her in a hallway. Morning of trial, prosecutor gives me some late discovery. It is an audio of my client's voice. Yes, he left a freaking voicemail, wondering why the Vic had security at an event and asking, "Did someone threaten to shoot her in the mother effing head?" We listened to it in the hallway. He still wanted his trial. I did what I could, but yeah, that was a quick guilty. A foolish move. And I know because I got arrested once for prank phone calling, in that I was like 10 and I also left a voicemail. Oh boy, did they get me. Next story. Not me, but I just read about the recent disbarment of one of my law school classmates. Apparently, he told his client that they won the case. They did not win the case. In fact, the case was languishing from inaction on the part of the lawyer. He then created a fake document saying they won the case, forged the judge's signature on the fake documents, then had the audacity to bill the client for the time it took to win the case. Imagine the surprise of the client when another lawyer at the firm called her up and said, "Remember how you paid your lawyer for a bunch of legal work and he said you won your case?" Yeah, well, none of that happened. So, yeah, he got disbarred. Weird that it happened to somebody I know. Next story. Public defender doing a felony assault case with a twist. Victim claimed that the very unique assault incident happened twice, identically 2 days in a row. So imagine she claimed he threatened her with an icicle, and she called her sister, and the sister told her to eat a fruit snack or whatever, but 2 days in a row. During direct, she was adamant that things happened this way twice. Yes, it sounds crazy, yes, but it happened. Yes, she was so scared, and he assaulted her, etc. It sounds pretty believable, and I'm starting to get worried, okay? Cross-examination. I start asking questions to set her up for an impeachment. Finally, I ask, victim's name here, Are we supposed to believe that these unbelievable, made-up sounding things happened to you not once, but twice? Then she quietly says, yes. And I push, yes, what? Yes, I made it up. This admission put me in such a shock I didn't even know what to say. I asked a few more questions and sat down, and the DA futilely attempted to redirect the question as if I had intimidated her. Client walked on the felonies but went down on a misdemeanor time-served assault even after all of this. But I never again had a victim admit that they were making things up on the stand. Next story. Somewhat related, our landscaper screwed up and refuses to fix. We considered a lawsuit but decided not to because we are pushovers. Went for a bad review online instead. Landscaper sends lawyer at us to have review removed. Reply and prove and all. Lawyer is clearly surprised and has to back out. We are now suing the landscaper's pants off. Don't push a pushover too hard. We'll push back. Next story. I got text messages from my client's mom the day of trial after the trial had already begun. The victim was offering to forget about his broken jaw my client gave him if the family coughed up some cash. The state's medical witness didn't show up and the jury was impaneled. I made a deal with the prosecutor to waive late disclosure of my evidence if I'd stipulate to the medical opinion the jaw was fractured. Not guilty verdict, even though he was completely guilty. Juries will wipe their butt with the jaw if they see something they don't like. That client is still waiting trial on an unrelated attack. Next story. This was my first killing trial as a prosecutor. The victim's sister is on the stand describing how the victim told the sister to go to work. The victim usually gets a ride to the same workplace with her sister. That day, she decided to stay home. She talked about this with me at least 3 times, and with the cops at least once. So when I asked her why did the victim not want a ride that day, I expected her to say because her husband, the murderer, wanted her to stay home. Instead, she said, I don't know, maybe she was having an affair with the auto mechanic. I interviewed a dozen witnesses. No one ever mentioned an affair. I wasn't even thinking of that as a motive. No one was. The auto mechanic was her husband's drug dealer. The husband started beating her that day because she was getting ready to go to work without making his dinner. It escalated and he killed her. The killer got convicted of a lesser crime because the jury thought the affair justified the killer, as one female juror told me after the trial. He still got 30 years, but dang, that not guilty on murder because some juror thought an affair justified murder shook me up. Next story. Represented dad requesting more parenting time. Part of my pitch as a lawyer is that I will work with my clients as we go to testify. We won't have a big prep session like they see on TV. I'm going to correct their responses as we go, so they talk about how they should testify. This works great for most clients, and they usually change how they speak to their co-parent and change how they think and act. Tell this dad that his final hearing is set for X days for 3 hours. Tell him it's mom's petition, so she goes first. Answer questions like we talk. If you can say yes or no, just answer yes or no. Hearing goes fine, except client refuses to admit he is an alcoholic, but goes to AA a few times a month. News to me, by the way, just got the denial before this. Leave court after he gets more parenting time, but gets chewed out for being a jerk. Justified. Client. You didn't tell me I would have to testify. A lesson learned. Always use the word testify. Don't just explain the process. Next story. Not a lawyer, but I used to sell old comics online. I sold an oversized Superman vs. Muhammad Ali comic, and he got it massively underpriced. $50, it currently sells for over $1,000 nowadays, but that wasn't good enough for him. He claimed months later it had a flaw. It did not, and threatened to sue unless I refunded $10. I actually received in the mail a letter from a law firm saying his client was going to sue me unless he got a partial refund. I called the number on the letter and explained the situation, and he was silent for about 30 seconds, and then said he needed to confer with his client. That was my last interaction with this idiot. I could only imagine the conversation that lawyer had with him once he found out the dispute was over $10. Next story. Not a lawyer, but a story of my ex-wife. I was being prosecuted for domestic battery after being accused by my ex-wife. What she forgot to mention to the DA was that she was attempting to damage my car by smashing big rocks on the hood and windshield because I told her we were done. When that failed, she threw white paint on my car. The reason we were done was because she was cheating. So she testifies that I beat her and threw paint on my own car in an attempt to frame her. She also claimed I had slammed her leg in a door frame, but really she tried to kick me in the nuts and I caught her leg. She'd pulled back and her leg swung into the door frame, so the prosecution had pictures the police took to document her injuries. They were shots from the sides, the front, back. It was all minor stuff, since I was trying to wrestle away the dang ice scraper from her. So, the interesting thing about the photos was that they showed her hands completely covered in white paint. This is from when she scooped up the paint with her hands and flung it on my car, so that definitely made her look bad. I also had the DA grill me about why the fighting started. My lawyer advised me not to talk about it, but I wasn't sure what to say. I told the DA that I was advised not to talk about it. I just said we had an argument that escalated. She kept pressing, and seeing as this was the first time ever in a court settling, I'd blurted out that we were arguing over her cheating. That upset the judge, and I got yelled at by him. Either way, it made my ex-wife look bad, and I could see the DA shake her head when my lawyer pointed out my wife's white hands in the pictures. Long story short, I was acquitted and divorced her. Edit. I wrestled the 3-foot-long ice scraper away from her as she was using it as a weapon to attack me. Next story. Not a lawyer, but I got a couple. Representing the father on a custody case, Mom was ordered to undergo drug testing. Mom has super long dark hair. Day of the arrest, the lab report stated no viable hair could be found anywhere on the body to test. Mom had buzzed off her hair and bleached the stubble. Next day, her attorney had submitted an affidavit admitting Mom smoked drugs, including when watching the children. Another mom lost custody because she had been drunk driving with kids in the car. Mom was on supervised visits. Attorney gets a call from Mom asking if she can also be represented in a new criminal case. Client was arrested from stealing from work. What the F? She had stolen money from the register to pay for the supervised visits. Bitter divorce between Mom and Dad, representing the ex-husband. Dad breaks into Mom's house and was apparently caught in her underwear drawer, according to the police report. Say Mom has a new boyfriend who has knocked her up. New boyfriend is cheating with a 17-year-old. Mom tells the 17-year-old's parents, who report the boyfriend for SA. Boyfriend calls same lawyer that is representing the dad and asks for advice. Attorney says they have never seen anyone prosecuted when they marry the underage child. The new boyfriend, now ex, marries the 17-year-old and hires the same attorney as the ex-husband to get custody of the new baby. Guys, people are cray-cray. Oh, whew, not a lot of periods or commas or moments to take a breath there. Next story. I have posted this story here on Reddit before, but it really fits the question this time too. IANAL, but told to me by a friend who experienced this while doing her internship at the court. First of all, this is about an Austrian law, and I try to explain it as good as I can, but when it comes to legal terms, my English does suck. Here in Austria, we have a rule in law which is called culpa in contrahendo, which simply means when you're about to close a contract, you do have some duties that you must not violate, so that even if the contract will not be finished but you do not obey these duties, you are still liable for damages resulting out of this behavior. So, here in Austria, we have two different types of claims for damages. Ex contracto means from breaching of a contract, and ex delicto means from breaking a law. So if you want to claim damages, you must prove that the other person broke a contract or broke a law which resulted in damages for you. So for you to be able to claim ex contracto claims, you have to have a contract or prove that the partner broke his culpa in contrahendo, shortened CIC, duties leading to his contract. This for the theory of this case. The case. Icy day here in Austria. A woman enters a shop and slips on the stairs, hurting her ankle. There is no law that you have to permanently remove the ice from the entrance stairs though, so no ex delicto, but the access to the shop being without danger is one of the CIC duties of a business owner, and therefore the woman sues the shop for her broken ankle. Please bear in mind that the sums of claimable damages here in Austria are really low compared to the US, and she would have only gotten maybe $1,000 to $2,000 from it, depending on how long she would have been in pain. Civil courts here in Austria have very much interest in solving these cases by getting an agreement among the parties. So, business owner, a clothes shop, offers her, I don't know the exact amount, something along $500 in vouchers to settle all this. To this, the woman just replies, "What should I do with these? I never buy anything at this shop anyways." And this was the exact moment she lost the case. She just said she never intended to buy anything there. So, no possible contract. Therefore, no culpa in contrahendo for the shop owner. She left the courtroom with nothing but the bills for both lawyers. Next story. Not a lawyer, worked at a workers' compensation insurance company. I took over an account after the previous guy handling it retired. Every year, we would need the payroll from the policyholders to calculate the premiums. This gets done every year. For this policyholder, the old underwriter had been writing the insurance policy on this customer for years with the understanding that it was a restaurant, being none the wiser because he would always collect information from third parties like their CPA, agent, or lawyer. The company name was something generic like Smith Enterprises Incorporated. CPA gets nasty when I'm confused as to why the wage records didn't show any tips despite these restaurant employees making considerable compensation. I find this odd. After leaving his office, I decided to visit the address listed on the insurance policy. It was a yard with 8 garbage trucks and a few dozen dumpsters. These idiots defrauded us by claiming their waste disposal company, high insurance premiums, was a restaurant, relatively lower premiums. Their excuse was laughable. Well, we pick up the dumpsters from the restaurants. Next story. Not a lawyer, but was interning at one as administrative support. One day I had to bring over a file and saw the names of both parties. Were the names of the parents of a classmate of mine. Seems they were going through divorce procedures. I spoke to him in private about this to offer him some comfort and just be a good friend. He told me that everything was already fixed and they were back to living together. They just forgot to inform their lawyers. When my next day at that office came, I asked about that case and it seems they had a court date rescheduled for later that week. After I told them what my classmate, their son, told me, well, his face went blank and he decided to make a phone call to his client. Seems they were already living back together for a couple of months and thought it wasn't necessarily to inform the lawyer. They were told if they were privy to this bit of information, it could have saved them quite a bit of money in the process for expenses. The lawyer in question was thankful, though, that I at least told him before the court date came up. Next story. Not a lawyer, but this was about a lawyer back when the custody battle was going on for me and my brother between my mom and dad. Was trying to go live with my dad. We had a bunch of little court visits that me and my bro really didn't need to go to, and the lawyer had been doing very well for us. So we had another court visit, and we were told that me and my little bro might not even need to come, but should anyway. We get there, and this turns out to be a full trial-like court date that we were not informed about at all by this lawyer that had been doing so well. And she did know it was going to be like that, and I literally had to testify on the stand, and everything was completely and totally unprepared to go to court for over 4 hours. That's what I have. Next story. A lawyer I know is eternally plagued with the issue that his clients will frequently tell him the answers to direct questions, but they won't necessarily provide all the information without a direct question. Effectively, they skimped on some work somewhere for a client, and so far in the current lawsuit, that particular cut corner hasn't come up from the other side. So they figure if they don't tell their own lawyer about it, then he can't accidentally give away that they ripped off their customer in some fashion. And then the other side inevitably does bring up the issue. It might be weeks or months of delay in the current case, because now the lawyer has to get fully familiar with the situation out of the planned schedule. Next story. Not exactly a moment, but in litigation claims, the number of clients who believe that you should work on a no-win, no-fee basis and take their case on irrespective of prospects of success is both scary and depressing. People have such an entitlement culture. When I was much more junior, I had to man the inquiry line. People seemed genuinely shocked that we were not willing to help them sue the neighbor who sold them a $25 washing machine that broke after 6 months, or sue the theme park which had to close an hour early due to a power cut, after they'd already received a full freaking refund. Next story. I sat on a jury where 2 guys had a fight that ended in the other 74 people present vomiting Sunday lunch in the pub car park because one of them used a CS spray. They were brothers and the witnesses were hilarious. Their BIL was obviously terrified of them, as was the pub landlord. The landlady wasn't. Her evidence completely contradicted her husband. The brother who lost the fight turned up covered in sewage to give evidence because he hadn't been warned. He lied so badly the usher had to hide his face. But that wasn't the best bit. When we retired, one of the jurors said, "He wasn't like this as a kid." The foreman went, "You know him? You heard the judge say we should say if anyone was known to us." "Oh, that? Yeah, never mind, he did it." After a quick show of hands, we decided that getting home beat calling a mistrial. I have broken quite a few laws telling you all this. Next story. Not a lawyer. An ex-boyfriend asked for his father's solicitor to write me a letter regarding the inadvisability of my contacting him after hassling him at his father's house, endangering his job by making him homeless, regarding a small amount of money that I supposedly owed him, yada yada yada. Veiled threats at the end of a bad breakup, basically. I called her, explained that the last time I'd seen him was when I dropped all his clothes off at his father's house the evening after I caught him cheating on me in my home with my friend, and threw him out. That he had been living with me for 18 months and owed me rent and bills for 12 months of that time, plus quite a lot of money from the 3 years before that, which he never quite remembered to pay back. The guy's a leech. Always has been, still is. That he had lost his job 3 months earlier and not told his parents, that I had no particular desire to ever see him again, and that he still had my keys. There was a moment of silence, and then she said, "You won't be surprised to hear that he told me none of that. I got a large check from his father and my keys in the post a week later." I imagine his father was not particularly pleased to have to pay me or the solicitor's fees, as the next I heard, via friends, he was 60 miles away living with his mother instead. Next story. I was a junior associate observing the deposition of a high-powered person in the entertainment industry. The attorney deposing him asked him to read part of a contract into the record, and the witness became combative and refused to do so. After refusing repeated requests to read the document into the record, the witness threw the document on the table and, exasperated, said, "I can't read." From then on, the attorney read the documents into the record. Next story. The plaintiff in a lawsuit sued my client, a local newspaper, for publishing a dimly lit, distanced photo of a man on a street corner. The story was about male prostitution. The male plaintiff said that the photo was of him, and he sued because he was defamed by being labeled a prostitute. At the end of the plaintiff's deposition, he was shown a document detailing a conviction for the prostitution. The question, "Did you pay the fine or do the time?" He said, "I did the time." His lawyer immediately called for a break, then proceeded to freak out, saying the guy had lied to him, that he took the case on a contingency basis, meaning he would not get paid unless his client won, and that he was withdrawing as counsel. The case was withdrawn shortly thereafter. Next story. Road traffic accident case. I act for the guy who got T-boned by a car. Moved from public hospital to a private hospital, which is a big deal in proving loss and damage, and you'd better have good reasons for it. Documents provided from the private hospital supported what client had told us, i.e., transferred from public hospital on their recommendation. Okay, good, great. Documents we later obtained from the public hospital say client discharged voluntarily at his own accord. Client is now making allegations that the public hospital was negligent, didn't give him proper care, etc. It's just all changing the story, right? Next story. Was helping a client in the incorporation of his company in U.S. It was a complicated transaction involving several shell companies. The tax advisor, client's brother, gave documentation to show a significant reduction in taxable income by following the transaction structure planned. At a late stage in the process, we found out that he and his former Middle Eastern company were blacklisted by the U.S. government for being associates of one of the best-known Middle Eastern dictators. Next story. Very first unemployment hearing. Client said the HR manager who trained him was different from the one testifying. I go to cross the HR manager. Turns out she was the one who trained him, and she remembered him in particular because it was her first day back from mat leave, and the client's son born just about the same time as hers. Next story. Not a lawyer, but this is a good one. Some years back, my state passed a law saying all welfare mothers must ID the father of their kids to stay on welfare and will go after those fathers for child support. So now I use fake names. My friend Tom gets a letter saying he must pay child support for a kid he fathered with Sally years ago. The kid was 16 at the time. Tom knew nothing about this until that letter. Tom decides to be his own lawyer. Of course, everyone tells him to get a real lawyer, but he won't do it. Even the judge was willing to give him more time to get a lawyer, but no. So, of course, the prosecutor asks, "Did you date and have intimacy with Sally?" "Yes." "Did you break up with Sally July of 78? "Yes." Next, Sally is asked the same questions and said yes, but now my friend gets to ask the questions. "Sally, we broke up in July 78, right?" "Yes." "When was the child born?" "April 12th. "What year was the child born?" 1980. "Your Honor, unless the prosecutor can explain how I fathered a child born over 18 months after we broke up, defense rest." Next story. Client: "My company fired me even though I was the hardest working guy." Me: "Dang, dude, that sucks." Client: "Yeah, man, like I even came to work when they were shorthanded and made the delivery when I was still buzzed." Me: "So you drove a big delivery truck under the influence?" Client: "Like I said, man, I was the hardest worker they had." Next story. I had a case that had about a dozen crazy things that all came out at once. The craziest was probably that one client, an old man, was banging the woman whose death caused the suit, and his son had slashed his tires and threatened him with a gun so that he would stop. Yeah, that was only one of many crazy things that came out. Next story. I had the opposite happen. I sued a county for being unlawfully tased by a minor who was on a police ride-along. Cop tased me out of nowhere and then proceeded to hand the taser to a kid who was riding along with him. Kid pulled the trigger again, fried me while on the ground. Anyway, I sued the county and got a lawyer. She was very risque dressed to say the least, with big fake boobs hanging out at the hearing. I say hearing singular because there was only one. My lawyer stuck her boobs in the DA's face and handed him the police report, which the cop meticulously wrote exactly what happened. DA settled on the spot. Waited for my big check to come because we, the lawyer and I, both had to sign it. Waited weeks, no return calls. Got contacted by some random partner attorney. She was arrested and jailed for being a hooker and lost her law degree. I got the last check ever cut from her office. I'm sorry, dude. The visual of handing the kid a taser. This has to be from a sitcom. Handing the kid a taser on a police ride-along and then he just fries the guy. Next story. I had a potential client come in to discuss the various ways she could challenge her husband's will. She was really upset about what it said and had concerns about it. We went through all the possible challenges, such as lack of mental capacity, coercion, and so on. She had a decent case. It was half an hour into the meeting that she casually mentioned he was still alive. Next story. One of my clients was being charged for manslaughter. It was a pretty upsetting and gruesome case, but I digress. Gave me all the evidence he had and was very cooperative. Everything was going well up until halfway in, when Detective also added he's a convicted predator. Turns out the victim was the mother of the girl he was grooming. Suffice to say, it did not look good for him. Next story. Not a lawyer, but I was a court reporter for a couple of years. There were quite some moments like that, especially when the people accused of a crime were not trusting their lawyers because they thought they'd get a better defense from them if they actually believed that the people were innocent. This usually didn't work out too well, and the end result as well as the frustration from the lawyers were, in my opinion, close enough that the stuff wasn't staged. My favorite was the one person that managed to wow the whole room until a couple of weeks in her facade started crumbling more and more, and you would realize she was a narcissist that had been in prolonged therapy. Only one colleague from another newspaper had her figured out right away. On the other hand, there were some cases where seasoned criminals, obviously, had already worked with their lawyers for quite some time, and there was a trust there. I think those lawyers knew exactly what was up, and because of that, they managed to get the best outcome from their clients. Next story. Defending a client in a car crash case. Ask him any drugs or alcohol at the time of said crash, and he denied it up and down. Got the depositions. Opposing counsel pulls out 12-hour suspension for booze certificate. Like, dude, what the F? How am I supposed to defend you if you lie to me? Freaking idiot. Next story. A friend of mine called me once and told me that over 3 years had passed since she renewed the lease in her apartment, was tired of her landlord and wanted to leave. During all that time, she paid the same rent. I told her, talk to her landlord. Come to terms or leave. She didn't come to terms, so she left. Out of nowhere, an aunt of hers got slapped with a monster lawsuit. Turns out she had signed a contract under a notary public that, unless otherwise requested, renews itself every year and doubles the rent. It's clearly an abusive contract, but still, she signed it under the eyes of an unquestionable witness. Her aunt was her co-signer, and she was being sued for a year of 2x and another year of 4x unpaid rent, adding up to 48 months of unpaid rent. She threw me under the bus for giving her the wrong advice while she failed to mention what was in her contract. Later, she told me that she didn't even read it. Yeah. Next story. It's usually after a power cut. Get a call saying, phones aren't working, can't get into that server, emails aren't working, I tried to remote in, but to no avail, drive half an hour to the place where I work, everything's fine now sort of thing. We did have some power cuts like half an hour ago. Servers don't boot up at the speed of light, people. Next story. Not a lawyer IRL, but I'm a role-play lawyer in Roblox. One time, I had a client tell me they got arrested falsely because the cops thought he had drugs on him. He said it was catnip. Once we put the lawsuit towards the sheriff's department of the area, he told me the officer had a Honda Civic. The officer was actually a civilian. The civilian was arrested and the lawsuit was put towards him. Nothing quite like the thrilling court cases of Roblox. Anyways, guys, that concludes our stories of the biggest, you didn't tell me that, sort of things that really throw a whole case under the train tracks. But anyways, if you guys have any stories that you would like to share, maybe you're a lawyer, maybe you're the one hiding evidence, who knows? Feel free to drop those down below in the comments because the stories are fun, they're interesting, and definitely pretty wacky. But as always, thanks for hanging out with me, and we will see you in the next one. Bye-bye!